Today's video feature is going to be a long one, but a very important video on standardized field sobriety testing. These are the roadside tests that police officers and state troopers use when they're investigating someone for a DUI or a DWI charge. It is largely the fundamental basis for whether they decide to arrest you or not. And because they have administered these tests so many times, hundreds, maybe even thousands of times, they make it look easier than it actually is for someone who is doing it for the very first time. So I wanted to give you a detailed overview of exactly what you're facing and why it is so difficult, if not impossible, to pass on your first go-round. Now, because I want to know as much as my adversary, I've taken the same course as the police officers had. I had to go to Atlanta to take this fundamental course, basic DWI investigation and standardized field sobriety testing. So I will be reviewing my notes. This is not something I can memorize in detail, so I will be looking down at my computer screen with the notes that I took in this course, which is very important. Now, from the outset, you need to know there are 3 standardized tests. Okay, and standardized means that they have to be administered the exact same way every time to get valid results. If the officer deviates from the standardized procedure, then the results are no longer valid and should not be used against you in court. The other thing you need to understand that there are only 3. They're the horizontal gaze nystagmus test, which is basically an eye exam being conducted on the side of the road, the walk and turn, and the one-leg stand. Any other test is not part of the standardized group, and I'd also like to highlight that these tests are only administered in relation to alcohol-based DUI or DWI charges. They are not designed or tested for drug-based impairment, such as marijuana, prescription drugs, or other illegal drugs. Now, the first test is the horizontal gaze nystagmus test. Why is it called that? Nystagmus is an involuntary jerking motion of the eye. It is something that the officer is looking for. A lot of folks say, I nailed that test because I was able to follow the stimulus, whether it's a pen or a finger. That's not what the test is about. The officer is using the stimulus or the pen to put your eyes in different positions so they can check for this physiological irregularity. Nystagmus. Now, there are lots of different types of nystagmus. Some people are born with a natural nystagmus. There are other types, false readings, so forth. So before the officer begins, they have to ask you certain questions, and I'm now going to refer to my notes. First, they have to ask if you are wearing contact lenses. They will also ask you to remove your eyeglasses so that they can look more closely at your eye. They'll tell you to put your feet together, hands by your side, and to keep your head still. To look at the stimulus and to follow the movement of the stimulus with your eyes only. Do not move your head. And that's a natural reaction. As people want to follow it with their head, they'll move back and forth, and the officer will have to correct them a number of times. It's also important that you continue to look at the stimulus until the officer says the test is concluded. Now, this is the only test of the standardized 3 where you're not having to do any types of feats of balance. You're simply standing there relaxed. Hopefully, you are focusing on the stimulus, but in terms of walking or balancing, there is none of that in this test. Now, as a defense lawyer, I can't see your eyes currently. Perhaps one day with body cameras, we'll be able to actually see whether there's nystagmus or to what degree. But right now we get to look at your back in most cases from the dash camera in the patrol car. Now what we look at is this. We look to see if you sway or stagger, sometimes fall. If you fall, that's a case that's never going to get to trial because you probably are very drunk. But we look very closely to see if there's any sway or only minimal sway, because that is an indication that regardless of what the officer finds on his exam is an indication that maybe you are not impaired and maybe you are not truly drunk. Now, one thing to keep in mind on this test is even under the most ideal circumstances, under the government guidelines and testing results, it has been scientifically validated and peer-reviewed, but it is only 77% accurate when testing for a blood alcohol concentration of 0.10. It's slightly better at 88% when testing for a blood alcohol concentration of 0.08. But again, this is under the most ideal, perfect conditions. It's still at best only 88% correct. Now, the testing procedure itself goes something like this. the officer will position the stimulus, either a pen light, or maybe a finger, between 12 and 15 inches from your nose, slightly above your eye level, so that your eyes open up and it can be seen more readily. The first checks for equal pupil size and any resting nystagmus, because again, some folks have a natural nystagmus. If your pupils are not equal in size, or if you have natural nystagmus, then this test should not be performed for obvious reasons. If you have a pre-existing condition, then there's a question about whether or not the officer should proceed. That's something that we will review when we review the evidence. Then he will check for, or he or she will check for equal tracking. It's about 1 second out to your shoulder and 1 second back, and only one pass is required for equal tracking. Everything else is done with 2 tests per eye. And because there are 3 different tests, and they look for lack of smooth pursuit, they look for distinct and sustained nystagmus at maximum deviation, and then they look for onset of nystagmus prior to 45 degrees. Each of those require 2 passes each. Now, because there are 3 tests and you have 2 eyes, there are a total of 6 possible clues of impairment with this test. If you demonstrate 4 out of 6, then it's indicative that you are impaired. Now, this is the very first test of the 3, and the officer can stop there, but they usually proceed. Now, another thing that we have found in practice is that almost everyone magically gets 6 out of 6 clues. We hear that in almost every case. Now, occasionally we get a break because the officer will testify that there were an odd number of clues, maybe 5 out of 6 or 3 out of 6, and that simply cannot be possible if you have equal tracking. So, in other words, the officer's made a mistake, and if I hear an odd number out of 6, then I know that the test results on that particular test are invalidated. Now, if you so-called fail the horizontal gaze nystagmus test, or HGN test, then the officer moves forward with the walk and turn test. This is the test where you're asked to walk a straight line, turn around, and walk back while counting. Now, again, referring to my notes, there are 2 phases of this test, and this one, in my view, is the most complicated because it has the most number of instructions, and frankly, it is the most number of steps required to even attempt to get it right. So this one, it absolutely is going to fail almost every single time for your first try. Now, the first phase is instruction. The second phase is walking. Even under the most perfect conditions, it is only 68% accurate testing for a blood alcohol concentration of 0.10 and only 79% accurate for testing a BAC of 0.08. So again, under the best conditions, there is certainly reasonable doubt on the accuracy of these tests. First, the officer will ask if you have any medical conditions with your back or leg or inner ear that would prevent you from trying to do these tests. During the pre-test instructions, this is before you actually start the walking part, the officer will put you on a line. Sometimes it's a real line, sometimes it's an imaginary line, and you will assume a heel-to-toe position on that line, your left foot with your right foot in front touching. And then you have your hands by your side. Now, if you could move your hands out like they do at the circus, you could probably even tightrope walk, but you're kind of hamstrung because not only are you in an unnatural standing position, but your hands have to be by your side. So you really have almost no balance whatsoever. This is one of those faults in my view of the test that almost hamstrings you. You're asked to maintain this standing position throughout the instruction phase and to not start the test until instructed to do so, and they will ask you, do you understand? Okay, now the second part of the instruction is they will tell and also show you what to do with 3 steps and then a turn. Now you're going to be asked to do 9 steps and turn around, but they will demonstrate by using a 3-step model. Now, on the eyes, you have to watch your feet the entire time. That means you're looking down. Your mouth, you have to count out loud. Your hands, you have to keep at your side. Do not raise your arms to balance, and they can be no more than just a few inches from your side. Otherwise, that counts as a clue against you. And you do not stop the test until it is completed. And then they'll ask you again, do you understand? Now here, there are 8 possible clues of impairment, which I'll go over in just a moment. Just 2 out of the 8 is a fail. Now, The eight issues that you can have is you stop during the test, you start too soon, you cannot maintain balance, you miss the heel to toe, you walk offline, you raise your arms to balance, you turn improperly, or you take the wrong number of steps. So you can see where there is a lot to remember in this test, a lot of instructions, and also a great deal of things that you've got to keep straight on the side of the road. And usually it is a first-time attempt on your part. Also, I don't underestimate the anxiety and the nervousness that you have. That is certainly going to affect your ability to do these tests. Nevertheless, they are relied upon by law enforcement in all 50 states under federal guidelines. The federal guidelines say if you want federal highway dollars, you have to adopt and use these standards. So every state, of course, does just that. Now, the last standardized test is the one-leg stand. Again, this one has an instruction phase, and then it has the actual test. Again, it is not very accurate, 65% accurate under the most ideal conditions, testing for 0.10, and 83% accurate, testing for 0.08. As with the walk and turn, the officer will ask you if you have any medical conditions involving your back, leg, or inner ear. Then during the instruction phase, you will have to stand straight with your feet together, hands at your side. Maintain this position during the instruction phase. Do not begin until instructed to do so, and they will ask again, do you understand? Now, you get to choose which leg. Either leg is fine, and you have to keep it raised approximately 6 inches off the ground with your foot parallel to the ground. You keep both legs straight with your arms at your side, and you have to look at the elevated foot, which means, again, your head is looking down. And you count out loud, 1001, 1002, and so forth, until you're told to stop. Now, the officer does not tell you how long this test will last. It's going to last about 30 seconds. If they knew that, or if you knew that rather, then maybe you might do better, but you really don't know how long you're going to be have your foot raised in the air. Now, there are 4 possible clues, and if you score 2 out of the 4, then you are deemed to be indicative of impairment. The 4 clues are: you put your foot down, you use your arms for balance, you sway, or you even hop. Now, the thing about these last 2 tests, the walk and turn and the one-leg stand, I don't think juries put a whole lot of weight on those tests. They realize how difficult it would be if they were in your position trying to attempt these things for the first time. It's on the side of the road. You've got the wind, you've got the traffic, you've got the anxiety of being investigated for a very serious criminal offense. Only if you are so impaired that you are basically falling out of line, falling over, falling down, those again are cases that never make it to trial because you are clearly impaired, or the regular word is drunk as a skunk. So those are the cases that juries never see. Instead, what they see are the ones that are close, where somebody does a pretty good job, certainly the best job they can do, attempting this kind of test for the very first time. Now, I know this is a lot of information. It certainly was a long video, but again, I hope it's been helpful. If you have additional questions, you are welcome to reach out to me directly. My name is Robert Reeves. My mobile number, 704-351-7979, or you can email me, robert@rjrlaw.com. Thank you.